on your direct testimony with Mr. Keese that Mr. Crumbley mentioned you have people you can talk to, we talk, and then mentioned something, your testimony was that his son mentioned something about a journal, or I'm sorry, that Mr. Crumbley mentioned something about a journal.
Mr. Crumbley's statement to my recollection was, you have your counselor, you have your journal, we talk.
Mr. Crumbley didn't say your journal, you know, the one that's in your backpack.
No.
He didn't say the one that you always keep with you.
No.
He didn't say a color.
No.
He didn't describe it at all.
No.
So to your knowledge, based on that conversation, you can't say that Mr. Crumbley's son knew what his son's journal would look like if he had a journal, based on that conversation.
No, I had no knowledge beyond that there was an existence of some sort of journal.
One moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Mr. Hopkins, you made decisions on November 30th of 2021 based on your education, your training, and your experience, correct?
That was a piece of it.
Also based on the information that you had in front of you.
That was a majority of it.
Which included 4 emails from teachers in approximately 2 months regarding Mr. Crumbley's son.
That was a part of it, yes.
Concerns that those teachers had raised.
Yes, that was a part of it.
Much of which you did not share with Mr. Crumbley prior to that November 30th meeting. Is that fair?
Correct. It was shared during the meeting.
Based on all of these things, you did not believe that Mr. Crumbley's son was an immediate danger to himself.
I did not believe that, no.
Nor did you believe that he was a danger to anyone else.
Based on the information I had, no.
I have no further questions.
Redirect.
Thank you. Mr. Hopkins, it appears that information and context would be important to you in these kinds of meetings.
Yes, it would.
Okay. Now, did James Crumbley tell you that November 30th wasn't the first time that his son asked for help?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son asked for help in April of 2021?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that despite that, never once was an appointment with a mental health provider set up?
No.
Did James Crumbley ever tell you that as early as June of 2021, his son had obtained his own firearm?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son had been begging for a 9mm firearm?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son actually sent him a screenshot of a 9mm for sale a few weeks before the meeting?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that his son actually obtained a 9mm just 4 days before this meeting?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that the 9mm he obtained looked identical to the 9mm that he drew right here in this picture?
No.
Did James Crumbley tell you that he worked for DoorDash, he hadn't begun work that day, he could have taken the son home?
No.
Did he tell you that when his son was talking about his friend leaving, it was actually his only friend?
No.
So you took what you learned from the defendant's son, you described those losses he felt as significant?
I did.
And that's without knowing all of that information?
Yes.
You mentioned that you would hope that a decision about a student would be made by a team.
I did.
Who's on the team?
The student, the parents, and any caring adult at the school.
And did either James or Jennifer Crumbley share any information with you?
I did not.
Had they what would you have done?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
She asked the same question on cross.
Did you ask that question?
She asked, what would you have done? Talking about calling CPS and such.
I no, actually that was related to if they had.
She asked if they had not obtained treatment for their son
Yes.
by the following day or within 48 hours.
If they had refused, actually, if they had refused to obtain mental health treatment, what would he have done? Not.
I'll rephrase, Judge, that's fine. Mr. Hopkins, you testified earlier that your plan was to call Child Protective Services within 48 hours?
Yes.
And that's based upon just the information that you learned from the defendant's son?
It is.
Would this meeting have ended differently had you known all the other information that we just went through?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
I think it does call for speculation.
I believe he can offer a definitive answer here, Judge.
A definitive answer about what would have happened if they had not contacted a therapist? Is that what you mean?
No, Your Honor, I was asking about a definitive answer for what Mr. Hopkins would have done if there had been additional information. And Your Honor, can we approach, can we approach, please?
Okay, can you turn off the audio? Thank you. Prosecuting?
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. You were asked on cross-examination that you didn't ask the shooter on November 30th if he had access to a gun. Do you remember that?
I do.
And your response was what?
I did not.
Okay, and did you have reason to ask him about that?
At that time, I didn't feel I did.
And you were asked about the shooter's recitation of what happened at the shooting range with his mother.
Are you stating I asked that?
No, you were asked that.
Oh, by Cross.
Okay, so you learned on November the 29th and November the 30th that the defendant's son went to a shooting range with his mother that prior weekend.
I did.
Did James Crumbley tell you that the shooter actually shot his new gun?
No.
Thank you. I've nothing further.
All right, you can step down in your excuse. You guys need a break? About a 10-minute break?
Thank you, Judge.
All right, so about a 10-minute break, all right?
All right, for the jury.
All right, you may be seated. Who's the next witness?
I'm going to find out right now, Judge. We have somebody traveling in, so I want to make sure it's
Okay.
here.
All right, so about 10 minutes.
Your Honor, calling People First James Crumbley, case number 222799989FH.
Thank you, Mark Keith, on behalf of people.
Karen McDonald on behalf of the people.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mario Lehman on behalf of Mr. Crumbley, who is standing to my left.
Ready for the jury?
Yes, Your Honor.
Judge.
Who's the next witness?
Mr. Nick Ejak.
Nick Ejak, okay. This one doesn't line automatically.
All rise for the jury.
Is there a button? Yeah, is there a button right there? This one doesn't line automatically, the other one's good. Is there a button on the back?
Yes.
You may be seated. Who's the next witness?
Nick Ejak.
Good morning. Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, could you step up and have a seat? And then could you state your name for the record and spell your first and last name?
Sure. Nicholas Ejak, first name Nichholas, last name Ejak, Ejak.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
In the year of 2021, where did you work?
Oxford High School.
Okay. And what role did you work there?
I was the Dean of Students.
And could you keep your voice nice and loud?
Sure, I was the Dean of Students.
Okay. And tell us, please, what does the Dean of Students do?
So the Dean of Students is primarily responsible for student code of conduct, so behavior and discipline, overseeing the attendance of the school, academic intervention, behavior intervention.
Okay. So Mr. Hopkins just testified, and he indicated he was a counselor, whereas you are the Dean of Students. So it would be fair to say that you handled discipline, whereas he handled the student advocacy?
Yes.
As of November of 2021, how long have you been in that role?
Just about 4 months.
Okay, so you were hired for that school year in the fall of 2021.
Correct.
Now that's part of administration, is that correct?
It's an extension of it, yes.
Okay. Was James Crumbley's son a student at Oxford High School in November of 2021?
Yes.
Prior to November of 2021, did you have any interaction with James Crumbley's son?
I did not know.
I want to direct your attention to what's been admitted as People's 201. This is an email from November the 29th, 2021, 9:32 a.m. And the email reads, "Good morning. I had a student during first hour, the defendant's son, who was on his phone looking at different bullets at the end of the first hour today as I was walking around the room passing out their essays. I didn't get a chance to investigate it a bit further since it was the end of the hour. Now that he's on my radar, I'm also noticing that some of his previous work that he's completed from earlier in the year leans a bit toward the violent side. I can bring down these things later today during my 5th hour prep if you would like them." So you and Miss Pamela Fine were both on that email?
That is correct.
Okay, and tell us please, who's Pamela Fine?
So Ms. Fine is the restorative practices coordinator and the anti-bullying coordinator for the school district.
Okay, and tell us a little bit, if you know, what that role entails.
Sure. So restorative care and anti-bullying across the district, she would be working with students to restore situations between 2 different students, a student and a teacher. It deals a lot with behavior, and so it's more of like, how do you fix or repair the situation? And so she often would collaborate with me on student discipline, and then the anti-bullying programming for the district would be like mentoring kids together to prevent bullying and to report it, when they see it, and it's more of a proactive approach.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you, Ms. Fine, and Mr. Hopkins have separate roles, but sometimes they intersect.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Now, did you have any interaction with the defendant's son on November the 29th of 2021?
I did not know.
Okay, and tell me what happened after this email was received by you.
So it was received by me when I was in a meeting that morning. So I wasn't made aware of it until after there was a meeting that took place between Ms. Fine, Mr. Hopkins, and the defendant's son.
Okay, so by the time that you had read this email, that situation had already been addressed by Ms. Fine and Mr. Hopkins?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you have any follow-up emails, conversations, or any other interaction regarding the defendant's son or with the defendant's son on Monday, November the 29th?
I did not know.
I'm going to direct your attention now to Tuesday, November the 30th, 2021. This is People's Exhibit 203. This is from a teacher in the school. Email sent Tuesday, November 30th, 2021, 9:32 a.m. It's addressed to you and Mr. Hopkins. Reads, here's the photo I took of his paper in case you need it. Signed Becky. And there's an attachment. Did you receive this email?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and tell us about your interactions with either students or administrators prior to receiving this email with regards to the defendant's son.
So I had received this email after I had alerted Mr. Hopkins to the worksheet because this teacher brought a photo of that to
Okay,
my
let me
office.
back up just a little bit. So before this email was received by you, did you have a conversation with a teacher regarding the defendant's son?
No, I did not.
Okay, so tell me how it is that you became aware of this math worksheet.
So the morning of November 30th, 2021, I was in my office when Miss Morgan, who was the teacher that sent this email, came down to our front office looking for anybody that she could speak with about a student that had drawn some inappropriate things on a worksheet.
And you were there?
I was the only one available at the time, yes.
Okay, and tell me about that interaction, please.
So she entered the threshold of my office door and said she was just looking for somebody to report something. And so I had waved her into my office, and she had stated that there was a student that had drawn some inappropriate things on a worksheet. And then she proceeded to turn her phone around and show me a photo of the said worksheet.
Okay, so this is Exhibit 130. Do you recognize this?
I do, yes.
And how do you recognize it?
That's the photo that was on her phone.
Okay. And so she turned her phone around and showed you this?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And tell me what happened next, please.
So I briefly read the statements and looked for a name in the corner and noticed that it was a name of the student that had been in the meeting with Mr. Hopkins and Miss Fine from the day before.
Okay, so you looked at the worksheet. What stood out to you when you first saw it?
The phrases that were written on there,
Specifically, which one?
the thoughts won't stop, help me, the world is dead.
Okay. What happened next?
My response to her was, I need to get his counselor. And her response to me was she needed to return to class.
Okay, so she went back to class,
Yes,
and then what did you do?
I walked down to the counseling portion of our front office to alert Mr. Hopkins.
Okay. And tell us about the interaction you had with Mr. Hopkins.
Sure. So when I arrived to his office, before I even mentioned anything, he brought up the defendant's son in sort of a question form. And my response to him was, yes, how did you know? And then he proceeded to share with me that he had received an email that morning regarding that student and thought that that's why I was there at his office. And then I had shared with him that I had just been shown a photo from Miss Morgan.
Okay.
And kind of explained what I had saw on the worksheet. And he immediately stood up from his desk and said, I'll go retrieve him from class.
Okay, so he received a different email the morning of November 30th than the picture
Yes.
that you were shown.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you saw this picture, were you considering this in the realm of student discipline?
Not at all, no.
Okay,
I
so
was more concerned that there was a mental health concern. And
Is that
so-
why you decided to get his counselor involved?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So after you shared what you learned with Mr. Hopkins, he went and retrieved the student back to his office?
Yes.
Okay, and tell us what happened next, please.
So I waited in Mr. Hopkins' office for him to return with the student, and he came in and sat down and began to kind of talk through what was going on that led him to write those things on his worksheet and draw some characters on there. And the defendant's son repeatedly made sure that we were aware that he understood why we needed to do this and that it made sense and that he understood how bad it looked.
Okay. Did you lead that interaction with the defendant's son, or did Mr. Hopkins?
Mr. Hopkins did.
And why is that?
As the school counselor, therefore, looking into a potential mental health concern, that would be his responsibility.
Okay. Did your perspective, based upon the information that you were told, ever change from a mental health lens versus a discipline lens?
It did not, no.
So tell us what happened next after the defendant's son went through the drawing of Mr. Hopkins?
So he had sort of explained that he was interested in video games and that part of those the drawings on there were him trying to get into graphic design, which led into a little bit of a conversation about how there could be potential avenues during his time at Oxford High School to delve into that deeper with some other programs. And then he kind of leaned in more towards the statements that were written on there and talked about how those didn't necessarily explain the video game aspect. And then I listened to the defendant's son speak about him feeling sad lately,
Okay.
which in a high school is not that unusual.
Were you involved in the decision to contact the parents of the student?
I was there for it, but Mr. Hopkins had mentioned that we were going to reach out to his parents.
Okay. At some point, did you leave Mr. Hopkins' office?
Yes, that was after we were able to speak with a parent on the phone. And so I left to retrieve the students' belongings since our class periods had changed.
Okay. At that point in time, COVID protocols were still in place?
Yes,
Okay. Did students carry their backpacks with them?
yes,
So you retrieved the defendant's son's backpack from the class that he was in and brought it to Mr. Hopkins' office?
that is correct, yes.
Okay. And did the defendant's son stay with Mr. Hopkins until his parents arrived?
Yes.
All right. Were you there in Mr. Hopkins' office the entire time, or did you come back in?
No, I came back in once the parents had arrived for the meeting.
Now, what was your expectation of what was to happen that day after the meeting with the parents?
My understanding and expectation was that based on the recommendation from the counselor that the student would be leaving that day, based on prior experiences at schools where parents are called in to talk about student mental health. Typically they leave when it's suggested that they leave.
With the student?
Yes.
You were there for the, how long did the entire meeting last between James and Jennifer Crumbley and Mr. Hopkins yourself?
I was there for 10 minutes of it, and there had been maybe 3 or 4 minutes prior to my arrival.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they waited for me to start or if they had already begun, but I know that I arrived a few minutes after they did, after I was alerted that they had arrived.
So were you there when Mr. Hopkins explained his concerns about the drawing?
Yes.
Okay. Now, he just testified, so I don't need you to go through everything he said, but do you recall if James Crumbley said anything?
During the meeting?
Yes.
He did. He expressed concern for his son, that he knew, or he reminded his son that he could always speak to him about stuff and that he had a journal that he could write stuff in if he was feeling frustrated or going through something.
Now, as a dean of students, when are you permitted to search students' personal belongings?
So when I have a reasonable suspicion that the student might have something illegal or something that's not allowed at school, and so there needs to be some sort of sign, like a report from somebody. Oftentimes kids will be seen with it, or they'll be showing whatever the things are that they've brought to school they're not supposed to. There needs to be some type of a suspicion or alert that I have that will allow me to do that. And so in this situation, there wasn't something that alerted me that indicated I needed to search.
Okay, and why not?
Nothing that he said, nothing that he, none of the behavior that he exhibited when I returned with his bag indicated that. There wasn't any suspicion that I had at the time that allowed me to believe that I needed to do that.
At any point were you informed about the defendant's son's access to weapons?
I was not, no.
Were you given details by either James or Jennifer Crumbley about the words and drawings on this exhibit?
I was not, no.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Ross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Prior to becoming the Dean of Students at Oxford High School, you worked in various schools and school districts, is that correct?
Yes,
For most of your career, in fact, you worked with at-risk students.
yes,
Normally, that includes students with some sort of academic or behavioral problems.
yes, that is correct.
In fact, your role at Oxford High School, you testified today, primarily you dealt with the code of conduct,
Yes,
behavioral and academic intervention,
yes,
and issues with attendance.
yes,
You had not had contact with Mr. Crumbley's son until November 30th of 2021.
that's correct.
So, as far as you know, once you became employed by Oxford High School, there were no behavioral issues with Mr. Crumbley's son?
There was not.
No academic issues? No attendance issues?
No,
You learned on November 29th of 2021 that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone in class.
yes, that is correct.
But once you had been made aware of it, or once you learned of it, you learned that that had already been handled by Mr. Hopkins and Ms. Fine. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So you didn't do anything else with anything that day?
No, it was,
Okay.
I didn't need to do anything further based on the fact that Ms. Fine and Mr. Hopkins did everything that I would have done in that situation.
Okay. So you didn't see any need for additional discipline or any additional intervention or anything like that, correct?
That's correct.
On November 30th of 2021, you were advised by one of Mr. Crumbley's son's teachers that he was writing inappropriate statements on his on a math assignment.
Yes,
You were quickly shown a picture of the assignment on a cell phone, if you recall.
yes, that is
You
correct.
didn't look at it very well, correct?
No,
You saw that there were drawings,
yes,
but you didn't see necessarily what all the drawings were. Is that fair?
that's fair, yes,
You did see the words blood everywhere,
yes,
but you didn't see much beyond that.
that's correct.
To you, the words on the page were more concerning than the drawings themselves, right?
I would agree with that, yes,
And that's because sometimes kids in high school draw violent things.
absolutely, yes.
That's not abnormal.
That's not abnormal.
You felt that what was on the paper was not appropriate for school, is that correct?
Yep, I would agree with that,
But that it wasn't in and of itself concerning,
yes,
and that you didn't see it as a threat to anybody.
that is correct.
You didn't see a correlation of violence with the drawings on the paper?
I did not know.
Again, Mr. Crumbley's son had no prior disciplinary history,
He did not know.
no prior bad behavior.
He did not.
He was a pretty average student.
He was, yes.
He'd only missed one class that year.
I can't speak to that.
You said you dealt with attendance, so that's why I was asking.
Yes, sure.
So you're not aware of his
I'm
attendance
not
history?
aware of specifically his attendance.
Okay. He had none of the typical early indicators that there would be an issue of concern other than these isolated incidents from November 29th and November 30th that you were aware of.
Judge, I'm just going to object to the form of the question. Typical indicators. This witness can testify regarding code of conduct and discipline, but that's it.
Yeah, unless he is able to testify about what a typical indicator would be, or by his experience.
And I can ask him that, Your Honor.
Okay.
Based on your experience dealing and your education and training with at-risk students and for your position as the Dean of Students, there are what you would consider early indicators of potentially concerning or threatening behavior. Is that fair?
I would say that's a fair statement.
Some of those include prior disciplinary history,
Yes,
prior bad behavior by the student,
yes,
issues with grades,
yes,
issues with attendance.
yes,
Okay. So knowing all of that, none of those, what I'm calling early indicators, were present other than the two incidents that you were aware of on November 29th and November 30th of 2021.
as far as I was aware, yes.
You sat in on the conversation between Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son on November 30th of 2021.
Yes, I did.
And that was before his, Mr. Crumbley and his wife got to the school.
That's correct.
Based on the information that you had at that time, you did not believe that Mr. Crumbley's son posed a threat to anyone.
That's a fair statement, yes.
You were even less concerned after you confirmed some of the information that you'd learned from Mr. Crumbley's son with Mr. Crumbley's wife.
Yes, after she had confirmed all the information he shared with us, my concern from a discipline standpoint was pretty much lowered all the way to none at that point.
Okay. And you said all the information that he had shared with you. And we've heard some about that, but I just want to confirm. That was about the losses that he'd experienced in 2021, correct? The loss of a family member?
Yes,
The loss of his family dog?
yes,
A friend had moved away?
yes,
He'd struggled with COVID?
he did, yes,
He had a hard time with virtual school?
yes.
Those were the things that you confirmed with his family, with his parents?
Along with his desire for graphic design and video games, and that they thought he should focus more on academics rather than that, which is what he had shared with us during the meeting.
Okay. When you say he had shared with us, are you referencing a discussion or an argument he had with his parents the night before that related to video game design and grades, or was this something separate?
Both. No, he had shared that he was interested in that and that he didn't feel his parents supported that, and that led to an argument the night before, but he didn't provide any context to that at all, and they had confirmed that, but they also didn't provide any context to that either.
So there was a confirmation that the student and Mr. Crumbley's son and Mr. Crumbley and his wife had an argument with their son the night before. It sounded to you like it may have related to video game design and grades, but you didn't have any context beyond what you believed it to be about.
That's correct, yes.
Now, obviously, during these meetings, you expect for a student's parents to give you information about things that they are concerned about, correct?
Typically in these meetings, parents come to them and they provide additional context, stuff they're seeing at home, a history of, if especially in a mental health situation, a history of any kind of counseling, and any issues they've had at other schools or whatever, but they usually provide additional information.
So you said specifically things that they see at home, things that they're concerned about. Obviously, in order for a parent to see something at home or be concerned about it, they have to be aware of it. Is that fair?
Speculation too, Judge.
I don't know how a parent could be concerned if they're not aware of something.
The Dean of Students can't testify as to how a parent would be made aware of something at home in a meeting, not even specific to what we're talking about here.
Actually, my question was different, Your Honor. My question was, he would expect that, or it's his belief that if a parent is concerned about something, then they're aware of it.
Well, then it's a lack of personal knowledge. Mr. Ejak was the Dean of Students in Oxford High School in November of 2021, in charge of discipline and code of conduct issues, Judge. Mr. Hopkins was the counselor. He's already testified.
Okay. I think are you asking him if the parents aren't aware of something, they're not aware of it?
Kind of, Your Honor. Obviously, and I can ask my question differently and see if it makes it a little more simple.
All right.
Mr. Ejak, based on your experience, your education and your training, and just your knowledge in general of you're a human being, if someone doesn't have knowledge of something, they can't talk about it. Is that fair? Does that make sense to you?
I would say that's a fair statement.
So we can't talk about things we don't know about. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Obviously, James Crumbley can't tell you about things he may not be aware of. I'm sorry.
Yes.
You weren't concerned on November 30th of 2021 by Mr. Crumbley's son looking at bullets or drawing guns. Is that fair?
I think there was a level of concern there, which is why we called the parents in for the meeting.
And if you recall, the level of concern was regarding the appropriateness of behavior in school.
Yes.
You didn't find his interest in guns or bullets concerning, especially in the Oxford community, if you remember.
Yes, that's correct.
You had students draw guns on papers in the past.
Yes, that's correct.
In fact, students in Oxford, not all of them, I'm not saying all students in Oxford, but there are students in Oxford who have guns in their home.
Yes. That's
You know that there are students in Oxford who handle firearms.
That's a fair statement.
You would agree that it's not unusual
No, it's not unusual.
in that community?
In that community, yes.
I'm not asking you to speak about any other community, but in that community, it's not unusual for students to handle guns.
That's correct.
When faced with a situation where a student has drawn guns on papers, you typically use your education and training to assess the risk.
As far as a discipline standpoint,
Discipline or otherwise, whatever your role is in that assessment.
yeah, so my role would be to look for any violation of our code of conduct. And so that by itself, the drawings on the worksheet don't violate a code of our conduct.
And a violation of the code of conduct would also encompass any sort of a threat to other people. Is that fair?
That's a fair statement.
So as part of your assessment, you're also determining whether or not there's a threat.
I'm determining whether or not I need to alert somebody to something that could potentially be a threat.
And in this situation, you didn't make that alert. Is that fair?
That is correct. There wasn't any information that led me to believe there would be a reason to alert somebody else.
And part of your assessment is, again, looking at those typical early indicators that we talked about, whether there's a history of violence, correct?
That's correct.
A history of discipline,
That is correct.
bullying behavior.
That is correct.
You look at, to see if there's a direct threat.
That is correct.
If those things are not apparent, if those things are not present, then it's just a student who drew a gun. Is that accurate?
That's pretty accurate, yes.
You were part of the meeting after Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived. And let me go back a little bit. So you sat in on the meeting between Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Crumbley's son, correct?
That is correct.
If you know, that meeting occurred, lasted approximately 90 minutes.
I don't remember.
Okay. You left that meeting at some point.
Yes.
Then you came back once Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived.
So I left the meeting to retrieve his belongings, the students' belongings, and returned back to the office and then left again until the parents arrived.
Okay. You entered Mr. Hopkins' office after Mr. Crumbley and his wife arrived in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's correct.
You saw that Mr. Crumbley was seated next to his son,
Yes.
which was directly across the desk from Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
It was your perception that Mr. Crumbley was showing care for his son,
Yes.
that he reassured his son that he can always talk to him.
Yes.
You mentioned something on direct with the prosecution about a journal,
Yes.
and you seem to recall that Mr. Crumbley made reference to a journal.
He did, yes.
You don't recall Mr. Crumbley saying the one that you always keep with you?
I don't recall that, no.
He didn't say anything like the one that's in your backpack,
I don't recall.
specific colors,
I don't remember.
how long he's had it.
I don't remember.
There were no specifics about anything about a potential journal.
Not that I can recall.
So to your knowledge, you don't know if there was one journal or 15 journals. Is that fair?
I can't speak to that, no.
Right, you have no knowledge of that. Is that fair?
Yes.
After meeting with Mr. Crumbley and his wife, you felt that they were receptive of getting their son help, as was suggested by Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
You and Sean Hopkins did not insist that it be done that day. Now, I'm going to clarify because I know that Mr. Hopkins indicated that he preferred that it would be done that day, but neither of you said, you need to take him today and you need to go get him help right now, and if you don't, there's going to be a problem.
What Mr. Hopkins had stated was that they needed to find him some counseling as soon as possible that day, if possible.
And that
And
he was
that he
going,
would be following up within 48 hours to ensure there was something secured for the student.
and that was going to be my next question, that he was going to follow up in a couple of days, 48 hours.
Yes.
And in fact, you didn't feel in that meeting that Mr. Crumbley's son was in need of immediate care based on your education and training and perception and the knowledge that you had in that meeting.
I can't speak to that.
In no way did you feel that Mr. Crumbley was being neglectful of his son.
No, I did not.
You felt that Mr. Crumbley showed the appropriate level of emotion with his son in that meeting.
Objection is, he can't speculate as the appropriate level of emotion. It's the Dean of Students regarding code of conduct, November 20th. Speculation.
Was there anything odd about his interaction with the son?
I wouldn't say there was anything odd.
Okay.
You also didn't find it strange that Mr. Crumbley and his wife did not take their son home that day because there was no reason for him to go home that day. Is that correct?
As far as the discipline goes, no.
During the meeting, you said that you retrieved Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack from his classroom and brought it back to Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's correct.
You indicated this backpack was heavy.
Yes, such as every other student in the school.
And let me clarify, that day, you didn't say that today. That day, November 30th of 2021, you commented to a teacher that the backpack was heavy.
Yes, I made a joke at how easily she picked it up, and then when she handed it off to me, my arm dropped down. So it was more of a joke at how strong she was compared to myself.
And if you recall, at the time, the students weren't using their lockers.
They were not using them.
So it was fairly common for a student's backpack to be heavy.
That's correct.
You didn't look in the backpack?
I did not, no.
You didn't, and I think you said you didn't have reason to look in the
I didn't
backpack.
have reasonable suspicion, no.
You didn't ask Mr. Crumbley's son to look in his backpack?
I did not know.
You did not ask Mr. Crumbley or his wife to look in the backpack?
I did not know.
You didn't look yourself or ask anyone else to look because you didn't feel that there was a reason to look in the backpack. Is that fair?
There was nothing from our conversation or from anything that we had heard so far that would indicate it was enough to reach to that level, correct?
You've had numerous discussions about this case since November 30th of 2021.
Yes.
You've talked with various attorneys.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm not asking you about what your communications were with your own attorneys. I'm not asking about that. I'm just asking if you've met with attorneys.
I've met with many different attorneys.
You've met with the prosecutor's office?
Yes.
On more than one occasion?
Yes.
And some of those meetings with the prosecutor's office were to prepare for testimony?
Yes.
Some were to get more information about what occurred on November 30th of 2021?
One was, yes.
You learned through some of those meetings that there was no indication that there was a handgun in Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack.
Can you restate that?
Sure. You learned through some of the meetings with the prosecutor's office that there was no indication that there was a handgun in Mr. Crumbley's son's backpack while he was in Mr. Hopkins' office.
Object to the formal question.
Yeah, what do you mean? What do you mean? Can you restate that?
Yes. I will be more clear. Do you recall testifying in September
Are
of...
you referring to counsel?
There was testimony in September 14th of 2022 that relates to this. If you'd like, we can approach to talk about it further.
I think we should.
Can you? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Lehman.
Thank you, Your Honor. As you know, approximately 2 hours after the meeting, after this meeting with Mr. Hopkins, yourself, and Mr. Crumbley and his wife, Mr. Crumbley's son began the shooting.
Yes.
You saw the footage of the shooting.
I did, yes.
You were not aware that Mr. Crumbley's son was the shooter
Initially.
at the time?
When I saw all of the footage?
No, let me go back. So at some point early on the day of the shooting, you saw footage of the shooting.
Yes.
And that was while you were in the office of the school?
On the phone with the 911 operator?
Yes. And at that point, the thought didn't cross your mind that the shooter may be Mr. Crumbley's son?
That's a fair statement, yes.
In fact, you didn't know that it was Mr. Crumbley's son until you were told that it was him after the shooting.
I believe as the video footage continued to play and we were still on the phone, it wasn't confirmed, but I had a pretty good idea that that's who it was.
Okay. Even looking back, after you know what Mr. Crumbley's son did 2 hours after that meeting, his behaviors did not show a pattern of what he was planning to do 2 hours later.
Based on the information I knew, no.
It's fair to say that you had years of experience with at-risk students.
Yes, that's correct.
Years of experience with behavioral, academic, attendance, issues of that nature.
Yes,
You have education and training about concerning things to look for in students.
yes,
You knew that Mr. Crumbley's son was looking at bullets on his phone on November 29th of 2021.
yes,
You knew that he had drawn a gun and some concerning words on his math assignment.
yeah, that's correct.
You knew that he was at the shooting range with his mom the weekend before.
Yes, that's correct.
You confirmed that during the meeting with his parents, correct?
Yes,
You knew that he had experienced significant losses in the months before November 30th of 2021.
yes,
You knew that Mr. Hopkins was recommending that his parents have him talk to a therapist that day if possible.
that's correct.
You knew that his backpack was heavy and commented about the weight of it to a teacher.
That's correct.
You knew that firearms were not uncommon in homes in Oxford.
That's correct.
You knew that students at the high school handled firearms and that it wasn't uncommon.
We're asked an answer now, Judge.
You knew,
Yeah, he answered that.
you knew that the shooter was going to stay in school that day.
At the end of the meeting?
Yes.
Yes,
Partly because he wanted to,
yes.
and partly because his parents had to go to work.
That's what I was told, yes.
And with all of this, all of the knowledge that you had on November 30th of 2021 at approximately 10:52 a.m., you did not feel that he was a threat to anyone, and you didn't feel that you had reasonable suspicion to look at his backpack.
No, because you have to remember, I knew very little of what we all know today. So when we're looking at the big picture today, I knew a fraction of what we all know now.
And we talked about this a little bit with Mr. Hopkins as well. We all know what happened at 12:51 on November 30th of 2021. But the information that you had at 10:52 a.m. or approximately 10:50 a.m. when that meeting ended, is the information that you were going on.
Yes, and that does not rise to the level of suspension or of a discipline, especially when you're considering mental health.
And it doesn't,
That supersedes any type of minor discipline or behavior violation.
so, and Mr. Hopkins talked about this a little bit. Looking in hindsight, there is more information.
Yes, we now know there's a lot more information.
You might look at things differently looking in hindsight.
I would 100% look at things differently.
But the information that you had on that day, at that time, is what led you to make the decisions that you made and feel the way that you felt about the situation that you were presented with in Mr. Hopkins' office.
That's a fair statement, yes.
No further questions, John.
Redirect.
Thank you. Briefly, Mr. Ejak, let's talk about the information not shared with you at 10:52 a.m. on November 30th, 2021. Okay, so you formed your belief that you did not have the requisite level of suspicion to search the shooter's backpack based upon what you were told. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Did James Crumbley tell you that he had bought his son a 6-hour 9mm firearm 4 days before that meeting?
He did not.
Okay. Did anybody, either his son or his wife, tell you that?
No,
Did his son tell you that, or did James Crumbley tell you that his son had been begging for a 9mm handgun?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that he actually got him a different firearm in June of 2021?
no,
Did James Crumbley tell you that the details and severity of his son's friend being taken from him at the beginning of the month?
no.
Now, you indicated that as far as a discipline standpoint, your belief was that the mental health concerns would override.
Yes.
So tell me about that.
So when you have a student who is being seen for mental health, and there also are some minor violations, this being a second day of insubordination, essentially, the mental health concern is what takes precedence because you want to build that relationship with the student and let them know that it's a safe space, and you don't want to follow it up with some kind of a negative interaction such as a discipline.
Is that one of the reasons why Mr. Hopkins led the meeting?
Yes,
Did your lens ever change from mental health to discipline?
it never did, no.
And is that based upon the information that you learned that day?
Yes,
Did James Crumbley ever tell you that the 6-hour 9mm handgun that he bought for his son was kept unlocked in the home?
no,
You were asked about certain indicators in your experience when you consider discipline. Is access to an unlocked firearm, is that an indicator?
yes.
Is that something to consider, had you known that?
It would be something to consider.
Okay, but that information was not shared with you.
No, it was not.
But just so we're clear, sir, The information that you and Mr. Hopkins were told on November the 30th, that information wasn't shared with anybody else in administration, is that correct?
That's correct.
I don't have any further questions, thank you.
Very brief request, Your Honor.
Right.
Very brief.
Okay.
Mr. Ejak, you don't know whether James Crumbley knew that his son had access to a firearm that was in the home, is that correct? You don't know whether James Crumbley knew.
Just the question was he told that?
I don't know how he would know what the defendant knew,
He
unless he
testified
was told.
what he was not told, Judge, that was the question.
Yeah, he said he wasn't told, but I don't know how he would know what your client knew unless he had a conversation about that.
Thank you. You don't know whether Mr. Crumbley's son had expressed any sadness over his friend moving to his parents, based on the information that you had on November 30th.
Can you say?
Yes, it was
Are you-
kind of a
Are you
convoluted
asking
question.
whether it was discussed in that meeting or?
Whether Mr. Ejak knew that Mr. Crumbley's son had expressed any of this sadness that they had identified to his parents prior to that meeting. Do you know if he did?
I'm not sure what you're trying to ask. I'm sorry.
Yes. Do you know if James Crumbley was aware of this sadness that you all had identified during this meeting with Mr. Hopkins?
I do not know.
No further questions, John.
Anything?
Was the information that was shared from Sean Hopkins regarding the emails that he received?
Yes.
Okay, and he went through the drawing with James and Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes.
And at no point did James or Jennifer Crumbley ever say that the firearm purchased 4 days before mirrors the firearm drawn on that math worksheet?
They did not.
Thank you, nothing further.
All right, you can step down and you're excused. Your lunches are here. Let's come back. This clock is wrong, obviously. If I were taller, it would have been fixed already. I'm going to ask you to return at 1 o'clock. It's not 5 to 12. I'm going to ask you to return at 1 o'clock. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you not to discuss the case with each other or anyone else. Don't look at any news media. Don't talk to anybody. Don't Google anything. Don't do any research on your phone or anything like that. Any questions about that right now? Okay. All right, we'll see you at 1 o'clock.
All rise for the jury.
All right, you may be seated. Who's the next witness?
We're gonna find out, I just spoke with counsel about that, and we'll let her know as soon as we know.
Okay, all right, I'll see you at 1.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Your Honor, calling People versus James Crumbley, case number 222799989FH.
Thank you, Marquise, on behalf of the people.
Karen McDonald on behalf of the people.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Marielle Lehman on behalf of James Crumbley.
Who is the next witness?
Special Agent Brett Brandon, Judge.
All right, you ready for the jury?
Maybe approach briefly, Your Honor. Thank you. Microphone.
Are you covering up your charitable organization?
Do you want to be excluded from the courtroom? Do you want to be excluded from the courtroom?
No, not especially.
Okay. Are you ready for the jury?
You go ready.
All rise for the jury.
You may be seated. Prosecutor, who's the next witness?
Special Agent,
Did you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, so help you God? Okay, please step up and have a seat, and then state your name for the record and spell your first and last name.
Brett Brandon, BRETT BRANDON.
Go ahead, prosecutor.
good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, Special Agent, can you tell the jury what role you're playing here today and during this trial?
I'm one of the officers in charge of this case.
Okay, and what does that mean?
It means that I've been assigned with Lieutenant Willis to usher this investigation through the prosecution.
Okay. This Lieutenant Willis?
Yes.
Okay, who's normally sitting right here. He's also an officer in charge?
Yes.
Okay, and can you tell the jury what your occupation is?
Yes, I'm a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. It's commonly referred to as just ATF.
And what does the ATF do?
The ATF enforces the nation's firearms, arson, and explosive laws. Obviously, we primarily focus on the firearms laws.
And so you're employed by the state or the federal government?
The federal government.
Okay. As part of that, well, I'm sorry, let me get to this. A little bit about your experience and background that brings you here to testify. How long have you been a special agent? How long have you been with the ATF?
It'll be 15 years in July.
Okay, and how long have you been a special agent?
Been a special agent for, it'll be approaching 11 years in July.
And what does special agent mean?
A special agent, so if it means we're a criminal investigator trained in investigating for the purposes of ATF, the crimes underneath the jurisdiction of ATF, but also we assist with other federal investigations and obviously state and local investigations for ATF, primarily involving the use of firearms.
And what is your educational background?
I have a degree from Oakland University in political science. I spent 1 year at law school at the Catholic University of America, and then obviously I was trained at the ATF National Academy for the requisite training to become an ATF agent.
As part of your role in the ATF, you're based in Michigan and live in Michigan.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any interaction with state investigations, and if so, what are they?
Yes, I've had many throughout my career. Right now I'm assigned to the Pontiac Gun Violence Task Force. It's a partnership between the Oakland County Sheriff's Office and the ATF. In that role, we investigate both state and federal firearms violations occurring within the city of Pontiac, primarily shootings.
And do you ever respond to or have anything to do with investigations that don't involve shootings?
Yes.
What kind of?
So generally, for whether it's the task force or just as an ATF agent, it's primarily the criminal possession and use of firearms.
So in other words, it doesn't have to be a shooting, it could just be a possession of
Sure,
firearms?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
About how many shooting investigations have you been a part of?
Hundreds at this point in my career.
And do you, as a part of in your role, have a general understanding of the laws associated with purchasing firearms, both in the state and federally, or just federally?
Both. Specific to this investigation, it would be both. Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what FFL stands for?
Yes. So an FFL is a federal firearms licensee. I think we heard testimony obviously in here before from Kami Back. She was the employee from the gun store in Oxford, as we're referring to it. That would be a federally licensed gun store, which is the technical term for that, is a federal firearms licensee.
And in order to become a licensee, what does that seller have to do or comply with?
So there's an application process that they have to go through with the ATF to become a federal firearms licensee.
And then are there guidelines or requirements they must follow?
Yes.
All right, we're gonna get to that in a minute. Do you know James Crumbley?
I do.
And how did you come to know James Crumbley?
I became aware of who James Crumbley was on the date of the shooting on November 30th, 2021. And I had contact with him inside of his residence during an execution of a search warrant that night.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you describe something he's wearing?
He's wearing a white shirt, a blue tie, and headphones.
May the record reflect he's properly identified defendant, Your Honor.
The record will reflect in-court identification of the defendant, James Crumbley.
Thank you. What, if anything, did you review in your role as officer in charge in this case?
A vast amount of information. So there would be the returns of 7 cell phones that were forensically extracted, social media returns, financial information, firearms records, including from the federal firearms licensee, and other documents and records, and surveillance video, obviously.
You were in the courtroom. Were you in the courtroom when Ed Wagrowski testified about forensic cell phone data?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what software or program you used?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. The question is what Mr. Wagrowski used. I don't know that Agent Brandon knows that.
I corrected myself in that question purposely to say what you use. Are you aware of what was the investigation tool they used in
What the
cell
ATF
phones?
What the ATF uses?
They both did. I'm trying to lay a foundation. Are you aware of, may I ask the question, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Are you aware of that tool?
Yes, it was the same tool. So Detective Borowski used Cellbrite, put it in a readable format. When he spoke about a readable format, it's Cellbrite, and that's the format that I reviewed the forensic extractions in.
Okay, which is what I was trying to get at. You have experience do you have experience in this investigation reviewing the cell bite information, which is the cell phone data?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to draw your attention to November 30th of 2021 and ask you to first explain where you were when you heard about the shooting.
So I was in the ATF headquarters for the Detroit Field Division is in downtown Detroit. I was in an office that I shared at the time with my partner, and the assistant special agent in charge at the time came in. He knew I was from the Orion, Oxford area and let me know that there was a shooting at Oxford High School.
You currently are there, or you grew up there?
Both.
All right. What did you do?
I grabbed my bag and I ran out the door.
Did you go with anyone else? Was it discussed about what you were planning on doing, what the plan was, who was going, who wasn't going?
No, I just ran out the door and got to my car in the parking structure, turned on the lights and sirens, and then drove up I-75 in towards the direction of Oxford High School.
Do you typically work with a partner?
Yes.
Was he there that day?
He was.
Did you let him know you were going, or did he come with you?
At the beginning, at the time, no, I didn't let him know. He was stepped out for a minute, and I didn't even think about it. I was so focused on getting to the school.
Okay. About how long or does it take to get from Detroit to Oxford School?
It depends on traffic. It could be an hour. It could be more. It could be a little bit less, just depending on the time of day.
And did you have a familiarity with the area?
Yes.
Okay. What, if anything, did you know about that incident when you left?
All I knew when I left was that there was a shooting. As I drove northbound, I did receive information from our intelligence unit that there was a confirmed shooting. It was not a false alarm. Okay.
And what did you do as a result of that?
I continued to drive north on I-75, and at some point, I believe it was in Troy, met up with other law enforcement, forming like a caravan, like others have Detective Bobrowski testified to, traveling north on 75, and then getting to the exit at exit 81, where the old Palace of Auburn Hills used to be.
So the caravan, were there other people on the highway?
Yes.
This whole caravan, was it just law enforcement?
It was law enforcement. I believe at one point there was even a news truck trying to follow the caravan. I wasn't sure if they were aware, but I think they were just running parallel with the caravan.
And was it licensed sirens?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of rate of speed?
It was very fast, but it was as safe as we could be.
Okay. Can you tell the jury and describe what it was like driving up to Oxford School that day?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the relevance.
Yeah, why is it relevant?
Because he's describing the scene and what he did and how he got into the school, and it was the scene of the shooting, and he was part of the investigation of the shooting.
Okay, so start there. So you arrive at the scene, you arrive at Oxford High School. Is that where you went first?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you describe the scene in terms of, was it easy to get there? Were there cars? Were there students?
So as we're getting to the school through, obviously, Lake Orion and Oxford, get to travel through there. All the cars were parked on the right side of the road. And so, it was almost like the left lane, there were no cars in it, and people knew what was going on at that point. It had seemed that word had spread because no one was moving. It wasn't just like you normally would get over and then get back over in the left lane. People were just parked on the road. As I got in towards the school, I started noticing that there was a large group of people at the Meyer, and obviously learned later that was the reunification point. When I arrived at the school, there were a lot of law enforcement personnel. I can't even put a number on it. It was dozens, maybe 100 in the main vestibule area where like the front offices were located.
So when you arrived, were there more than one law enforcement agency? Was there more than one represented?
Yes, there were quite a few.
Okay. Did you know anything about where the alleged shooter was, whether there were victims? What did you know when you approached the building?
At that point, I had a conversation with someone in our intelligence group that had confirmed, relayed information that they had received that there were fatalities, there were injured victims.
Did you know whether or not the shooter was in custody?
No, I didn't. I assumed that I didn't hear any gunfire when I got to the school. So I assumed that either the shooter was in custody or it was a barricade. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew that it was not an active shooting scene.
Did you do anything before you entered the building? Were you carrying a weapon?
Yeah, so I put on my vest and then ran to the front of the school with other people from the parking lot that were approaching the school. As I got closer, the person at the door verified my identity as a law enforcement officer, and then at that time was informed that the shooter was in custody and that they were starting kind of figure out who was going to be responsible for what inside of the school. As you can imagine, it was a very chaotic scene. And
okay. You mentioned a vestibule when you earlier. What do you mean?
It was like the front area in front of like the front of the school where you'd have like offices where you'd check in if you were taking your kid out sick for the day. It was the main office area, and that's where I was directed to meet with Lieutenant Willis, who was identified as being the officer in charge of the scene.
Is there a difference between the phase of clearing a crime scene versus evidence collection?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what the difference is and what comes first and what that is like?
Sure. So at least the way ATF is trained, it would be an active shooter response would be to train and to find and eliminate the threat. After that has occurred, you have a clearing of the school, tactical clearing of the school to ensure there's no other bodies, secondary devices, or things of that nature. In this instance, it became clear that there were two things going on at once. There was people volunteering to clear the school for a second time, and then there was Lieutenant Willis, who was directing more of the investigative aspects of this case.
When you arrived, do you know about what time you arrived?
I don't recall exactly what time I arrived, no.
Okay. Were there still students in the school?
Not. If there were, if they were in classrooms, I wasn't aware of it. I did not see any students when I got to the school.
Was part of your role to engage in clearing the school?
So generally, yes, with ATF, we would be involved in clearing the school, the active shooter response, the clearing of the school, and then the investigation.
I mean, when you got there that day, did you help clear the school?
I did not. Based on the fact that the investigation had started, that the shooter was in custody and they had the weapon secured, I thought the best use of my abilities as an ATF agent would be to start the trace of the firearm to determine how it ended up there.
Okay. You just said you found Lieutenant Willis. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Where was he standing?
He was standing in front of the school offices. At one point, he was standing on a chair directing people around. Like I said, it was very, very chaotic. But I found Lieutenant Willis, and I believe someone had told him I would be coming to help trace the firearm, and that's when I went over and located it.
And before that, had you ever met Lieutenant Willis?
No.
Okay. And what happened next?
So Lieutenant Willis held up a trash bin that had the murder weapon, several magazines, ammunition, and the shooter's cell phone inside, and I was able to take photographs of it.
Okay. A trash bin, a plastic trash bin?
Yes, so a trash, not a one you throw like a school lunch in, but like a small one you have in like an office, like a square or rectangle trash bin.
And if you know, what was it doing there? Or how did it get there?
It was my understanding that evidence was placed in there to keep it safe while they were continuing to clear the school.
Okay. And you said he held it up, and then what happened?
I took photographs of the evidence, specifically the markings on the firearm that I needed to start the tracing process.
And when you say markings, what do you mean by markings?
So the firearms are required to have a make, model, and a serial number. Those three items are necessary to start the trace for ATF to determine where it was first sold.
Did you actually physically pick up the weapon?
I don't believe so. I don't think we wanted to preserve the evidence. I believe that the firearm was already flipped in a way that had the markings visible. I believe I just took a photograph of it and then provided that information to the intelligence group that would initiate the actual digital part of the trace.
Okay. Once you did that, what did you do next?
So once that process had been started, I went to Lieutenant Sam Marsban, who I had known from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office based on prior investigations, and in Pontiac, and asked what could be done, what needed to be done. And at that time, I began collecting facts for the timeline for a search warrant affidavit for the Crumbley's family residence.
Okay. Did you, well, we'll get to that. As part of your investigation, did you ever look at the surveillance video of the shooting?
Yes.
Okay. Before we get to that, did you, what are the steps and how long does it take to trace a firearm through the ATF?
So the timing of every trace is going to be different based on the records and how fast they're able to get to ATF. So it'll help you to understand the tracing process starts with those three things, right? The make, model, and serial number of the firearm. Once you have that information and you input it, you can trace it back to the first manufacturer, right? And when the manufacturer is then contacted by ATF, they can tell you which federally licensed gun store they sold it to, and then that gun store has to tell you who was the first person that purchased that firearm.
And did you learn who that was?
Yes, it was an individual in Rochester, Michigan, and obtained the firearm from the gun store in Oxford.
And then was that person contacted?
Yes.
And were they contacted by you or someone on your team?
It was two ATF agents assigned to the same division I'm assigned to.
And what did they learn?
They learned that that individual had sold the firearm back to the Oxford gun store sometime in early September.
And then what did they do?
They went to the gun store and spoke to Ms. Cammie Back, who testified previously, and learned that the firearm was in fact, purchased by Mr. Crumbley on November 26, 2021.
So 4 days earlier?
Yes.
Okay. And if we can stop for a moment, did you just say September?
I meant November, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to Mr. Keeks who pointed that out. November, correct?
November,
Okay.
yes. And
if we want to stop here for a moment, walk us through a general purchase of a firearm through a federally firearm licensee.
sure. So if you walk into a gun store today to buy a firearm, you'd have to fill out what Ms. Back testified was called an ATF Form 4473. It would have information about yourself, as well as information about the firearm you're purchasing. The FFL employee then would contact the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS system, through the FBI. And once they're given the okay to sell you the firearm, they proceed with that.
Do you know if that protocol and procedure was followed here in
Yes,
this
it was.
case? All right. You just stated that in order to buy a firearm, you have to go through all those steps. Is that all guns? Do you have to go through this process?
So for every firearms sale from a federal firearms licensee, you do have to fill out the ATF 4473 and have those steps be fulfilled, yes.
Does that include all guns, long guns and pistols?
Yes.
Okay, and are there differences in long guns versus pistols?
Yes.
In terms of who can buy them and where?
Yes, in terms of age and things like that, there are different restrictions on the types of firearms you're purchasing.
Okay, and in general, how would you describe the restrictions on what is more restricted and less restricted?
Sure. So under federal law, if you're going to buy a firearm from a federal firearms licensee, you have to be 21 years of age to buy a handgun and 18 to buy a long gun. That would be either a rifle or a shotgun.
All right. And what about registering a weapon?
So there's no federal requirement for registration of a weapon. There is, however, obviously based on my experience in this case and others through the task force work, I'm aware obviously in Michigan that there are certain registration requirements for handguns.
And why the same requirements for long guns?
No.
And do you know why that is?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Only if you know, did you
I
say?
have to
in the
ask him first if he knows that's what I'm trying to do.
Did you say in the state, there isn't federally, but there's a state?
Correct.
Okay. State of Michigan.
Through your position in the ATF, do you know why?
Can you answer my question?
Yes,
What-
I thought he
The
did.
state of Michigan?
It is the state of Michigan. Yes.
Thank you.
Do you know why there are more restrictions on handguns?
I believe it's due to concealability.
Okay. Under state law, who can register a weapon?
Under state law, register a handgun?
Yes. sorry.
Okay. So under state law, you can register a handgun at 18 years old. But obviously you can't buy one till you're 21 from a federal firearms licensee. So you can, in one way, buy a private sale from someone that's 18 to someone that's over 18, and then register that firearm. So I have seen through previous experience that you could register a weapon at 18, a handgun, but you could not purchase that handgun from a federally licensed gun store, if that makes sense.
Okay. Were you made aware at some point if James Crumbley owned any other weapons other than the weapon he purchased on November 26th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the reference of a weapon. I think it's a vague question. I think what Agent Brandon is aware of is alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. I think that the classification of a weapon is vague. If the prosecution is asking about firearms or handguns or pistols, then I think that should be the question and not specifically a weapon.
Well, his response can clarify that.
Correct,
right?
Your Honor.
Right? So go ahead.
You were made aware, what other, the reason I'm using weapon is because I don't want to specify because that'd be leading, so I'm trying to get him to explain it without asking a leading question. You were made aware, what did he also own or purchase, if you know?
So in June of that year, he had also purchased a Cobra Classic Derringer and also a Keltec P17 .22 caliber pistol from that same gun store in Oxford.
So that was about 5 months earlier?
Yes.
Okay. Were both of those guns bought at the same time?
They were bought within several days of each other, but they were not bought at the same time.
And how, did the gun store have any record of those sales?
Yes.
What was it?
So they had the 4473 documenting the sale of the Derringer, as well as a sales receipt and a Michigan pistol sales record documenting the sale to Mr. Crumbley for both the Derringer and the Keltec pistol.
Okay. So you've indicated now 3 separate handguns. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I am going to start asking you about each of these handguns and describe the difference in each. I'm putting on gloves because these are evidence and I'm gonna touch it with my gloves on. And the first handgun I'm gonna ask you about is the handgun purchased on November 26th. Do you know what type of handgun it was?
Yes.
What was it?
It was a 6 Sauer SP 2022 with a specified serial number.
And so was it a 9mm?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right, so before I do that, Special Agent Brandon, what is the way to handle a handgun safely before you even pick it up? I know there are firearm safety guidelines, but how do you make sure when you're handling a weapon for the first time that you're doing so in a safe way before?
Object to relevance, Your Honor.
Response?
I think the element of the crime that the defendant is charged with goes back to a legal duty in handling and storing a firearm. And so I absolutely think it's relevant.
Okay, do you mean picking it up or?
In every way.
Okay, I'm gonna allow it.
Thank you. How do you safely pick up a handgun?
Sure. So based on the fact, so there is a zip tie in it, so everyone is aware that firearm has been made safe already, but for the purposes of this, so if you pick up the firearm, you want to keep it pointed in a safe direction, you want to keep your finger off the trigger, and you want to visually and physically inspect the chamber of the weapon and the magazine well of the weapon to make sure that it's not loaded.
Okay, so I'm gonna pick up this. We know that is this the murder weapon?
Yes, it is.
All right, and we know that this has a zip tie in it.
Correct.
Okay.
Can you specify what exhibit number that is?
Yes, I'm sorry.
163.
163.
Okay.
I think it's either admitted or there's no objection to it.
Correct.
Okay, this is the murder weapon. There's a zip tie in it. But even if there isn't, the general principle is to make sure the firearm is safe. You just said you physically examined the magazine well. Is that this right here?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then You also have to do a second step, did you say?
Yeah, so the same thing, so I would say physically and visually inspect the chamber of the weapon, so down the barrel, if you look down the barrel right there.
So right
yep,
here?
to make sure there's not a round inserted into the chamber of the firearm.
Okay, and again, there's a zip tie in here, but in order to comply with that, you'd have to physically inspect to make sure there's no round in this chamber.
Correct.
And why, what's the reason for that?
So with firearm, there's 4 basic principles of firearm safety. I mentioned 2 of them. Number 1 is to treat every firearm like it's loaded. Number 2 is to point the firearm in a safe direction. 3 would be keep your finger off the trigger, and then obviously not for report purposes, but if you're at a range or shooting, is to be mindful of your target and what's beyond it. At least that's the way ATF trains the 4 pillars of firearm safety. So the purpose would be to make sure that firearm's not loaded, that in case the trigger was accidentally or unintentionally discharged, that there's not an actual round in the chamber to be discharged.
Is it possible for a firearm to discharge without touching the actual trigger?
That would depend on a lot of different factors, including the type of firearm.
Okay.
I probably can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that you have to identify certain markings. Where are, and I'm gonna give you some gloves if you don't mind. We practice with the gloves, so it doesn't take this long, but it's so. Okay, if you wouldn't mind standing if that's okay with the judge.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna hand this handgun to you, safely pointed down, so you can show the jury what markings you're talking about to identify the weapon.
Yep, so as you can see right here, it's kind of hard to see with the light, but it says Sig Sauer, that would be the manufacturer. And then you have the serial number as well as the caliber generally also stamped on there as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna put this safely back into its box. And then do you know what these are?
Yes, those are the pistol magazines that come with the Sig Sauer SP 2022.
Okay, and just in case there are people on the jury that don't have a familiarity with handguns, what are these for? What's inside here usually?
So in a semi-automatic pistol, you would load your ammunition. Those magazines, I believe, can take up to 15 rounds. So you load the 9mm ammunition to capacity to 15 rounds, and then insert that into the firearm. And then once you send the slide forward, that is what allows the round to be chambered into the firearm to be ready to be discharged.
So it has a 15 round capacity.
So it would have a 15-round magazine capacity. You can also fit 1 round in the chamber, so that firearm has a total capacity of 16 rounds.
Before you would have to reload?
Yes.
Okay. So can you explain to the jury what semi-automatic means?
So a semi-automatic firearm means that for every pull of the trigger, it only fires 1 projectile from the firearm, as opposed to a automatic firearm, which would be that if you pull the trigger 1 time, multiple rounds are dispelled from the firearm with 1 pull of the trigger.
The other 2 weapons you stated were a Derringer and a 22, correct?
It was a 22 caliber Derringer and a 22 caliber Cobra Classic, or a 22 caliber Kel-Tec pistol.
Okay, so Kel-Tec, all right. What is the difference between those 2 guns and a 9mm?
So a Kel-Tec, the Kel-Tec pistol is also a semi-automatic pistol. It's just chambered at 22 caliber as opposed to 9mm. It's a smaller round, and the Derringer.
And again, you say round, and I think for lay people they think of that as many. But what do you mean when you say round?
So I know that there's been some talk in this trial about bullets. Bullets are the part of the piece of ammunition that comes out of the firearm when it's shot. The round of ammunition is what's inserted into the magazine before it's fired. That has the fired cartridge case, the bullet itself, and then some type of propellant or powder, usually smokeless powder.
Okay, so a bullet is what comes out of the shell casing and is expelled from the chamber, but a round includes the shell casing and the bullet and any kind of what was the last thing?
Yes, it would be like the powder that's used yeah. So
Okay.
they would be the round of ammunition is the actual full piece of ammunition prior to being fired.
Okay. And does the 22 that James Crumbley owned, does it shoot or fire faster? Does it have a larger capacity magazine?
So I'm not an expert on ballistics and traveling of speed of firearms, but as far as capacity goes, it's got, I think the Keltec P17 has a 17 round total capacity, but the actual round of ammunition itself, the 9mm versus the 22, the 9mm is going to be a wider round. So what the caliber refers to is the diameter of the bore, the inside of the barrel. So it means that the 9mm round is bigger. And based on the size of the round, it's got more. It's going to be heavier, so the damage from that round would be more than a 22 caliber round. Does that make sense?
What kind of handgun does law enforcement usually carry?
9mm generally. At ATF we carry 9mm, and most of the departments and agencies I work with carry 9mm.
And do you know why?
Your Honor,
I would object to relevance. How is it relevant?
It goes to the power and the use for a 9mm versus the weapon that the two handguns that James Crumbley already owned.
I guess I would have normally agreed with you, but we've heard testimony in this trial that the shooter was intent even after the family owned two other guns on having his father buy a 9mm. So I'm going to allow it.
Thank you. Can you tell the jury why law enforcement usually carries a 9mm, or you do with ATF? If you know.
Sure. So my understanding, based on the reasoning that ATF uses and other agencies, is that it's a powerful round that could be used to neutralize a threat. It's not going to over-penetrate, and the advancements in ballistics have made a 9mm the ideal round for law enforcement for using in defense.
And to put this into context, the hundreds of shooting investigations that you've conducted or have been a part of, are those done normally with a 22 or 9mm or something else? If you can say
Sure.
generally.
I don't think I can't recall working a shooting with more than one victim involving a 22 caliber firearm. I can recall several shootings that I've worked in the past with multiple victims involving a 9mm.
All right, thank you. I'm going to put this back in the evidence box and hand it to Lieutenant Willis, who is in charge of.
Your Honor, may we approach, please? Microphone.
Okay, thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. All right, so. All right, I'm going to now introduce Exhibit 164. And okay, what is this?
That's the Cobra ENT Classic 2-shot 22 caliber Derringer purchased by Mr. Crumbley. I believe he paid for it on the 15th of June of 2021 and picked it up on the 16th of June 2021.
Okay, and this is pretty small.
Yes.
Okay, so what is this used for typically, if you know? And how many rounds can it?
It can hold 2 rounds. I mean, in today's, I don't know if I can say exactly what it's used for. People use firearms for very different purposes, but you know, I know that that's been used in the past for a variety of different things.
Okay, thank you. And again, this was purchased when, if you know?
It was June 16th of 2021.
Okay. And that was 164. Okay. And this is 165. And again, do you know what this is?
Yes, that's the Kel-Tec P17 22 caliber pistol purchased by Mr. Crumbley on June 17th of 2021.
Okay, and if you know, how was this weapon made safe by you or somebody else before I handle it?
Yes.
And how was it made safe?
When I was going through the last trial, cutting off zip ties and putting new ones on, I racked the slide 3 times, made sure there was no round in the chamber, and then myself and Lieutenant Willis installed zip ties on firearms.
Okay, so there's a zip tie on this?
Yes.
Okay. And again, can you tell the jury what this is? What? In a moment, we're going to see the defendant's son handling it, a video. Is this the weapon that he was handling in that video?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hand this to you because I'd like you to explain to the jury how to safely handle this weapon in terms of what the safety means on and off. Can you do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is the Kel-Tec P17 pistol. So it's not an official phrase, but it's what one a lot of people use is red means dead. So when the safety is off, you can see the red dot. So to engage the safety, you'd have to, you know, put the safety up. I don't think it's going to do that now with the, well, it'll go up now. Yeah, with the zip tie, and sometimes it's hard to get the slide to go all the way forward. But now the safety would be engaged. So if you pull the trigger, it's not supposed to fire. And when you come back down, that means red means dead. That means the safety is off.
Okay. And that is this also? Do you use a magazine with this gun?
Yes.
Okay. And how many rounds, if you know, does that hold? 16
rounds in the chamber, 1 round in the or in the magazine, 1 round in the chamber for a total of 17.
Okay. Were there any gun cases recovered in the home?
Yes.
All right. I'm handing you what's People's Exhibit 166. Can you tell the jury what that is?
Yes, this is the pistol case that goes with the Kel-Tec P17 pistol that I was just holding. It was located in the kitchen under the, I guess the island in the kitchen of the Crumbley residence.
Okay, and can you, if you wouldn't mind standing and showing how that is opened and what it looks like?
And this is the 6-hour, the cable lock that comes with the 6-hour pistol that was
We're going to get to that in a minute.
inside the Kel-Tec box.
So this is proposed exhibit 42. This case was this cable lock found in this case?
Yes.
Okay, And you said it was located in the kitchen?
Yes.
Where exactly in the kitchen, if you know?
I believe it was one of the cabinets underneath the island of the kitchen, or a kitchen cabinet.
Okay, was there any gun in it?
No.
Okay, thank you.
That's the Caltech box, right?
This
Yes,
is
Your
the,
Honor.
this is the Caltech box, 166. You can see that. All right, and was there any other case found in the home?
Yes, one
Gun
other.
case. Okay, I want to just make the distinction here. Is there a difference between a gun case and a gun safe?
Yes,
Okay, what is it? And when I'm saying safe, I mean a portable safe.
sure. So a gun case is generally what comes from the manufacturer, or sometimes a gun store, if they're selling you a used firearm, will use an old gun case to give with you. But the Caltech box I was just holding has 2 holes in it that can be locked. That's a gun case. That's what comes with the purchase of a firearm, specifically a handgun most of the time.
Is this what you're talking about?
Yes, there are
Okay.
holes on both sides that a locking mechanism could be run through to lock the case itself.
Did you find any of those locking mechanisms, or was it found just like this?
There were no locking mechanisms in it when it was found.
Okay. I'm gonna hand you People's Exhibit 167. And you might have to stand to show the jury so they can hear. What do you know what that is?
Yes, this is a small pistol safe. So it's got a combination lock, and so it would just, you close the lock. It's typical your standard combination lock. You close it, spin the dial, and have your combination code.
And do you know where that was found in the house?
Yes, it was in the on a TV stand in the Crumbley, Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley's bedroom on the right-hand side, inside of a cabinet.
All right, and was there anything in it?
Yes.
What was in it?
So there was the Caltech P17 pistol, as well as the Derringer 2-shot 22 caliber handgun as well, both inside this safe.
And that was the small gun that we just showed the jury, correct?
Correct, yeah, they both fit in here.
And then the Caltech that you just showed them with the safety?
Yes.
Those 2 weapons,
That's
okay.
correct.
So
This one, go down here.
there's a combination on this safe,
Yes.
and do you know what the combination was?
Well, I know what it is. I just opened it. It's 000.
Okay, was this the combination at the time when this safe was found?
Yes.
Okay. Does the SIG fit in that gun case?
It does
The
not.
gun SIG.
It does not fit.
Even if it's just by itself without any other handgun?
Correct.
Okay. Was there any other case found in the home?
Yes.
And I'm gonna hand you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 41. And what is this?
This is the
Go ahead,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
This is the Sig Sauer SP 2022, the murder weapon. This is the pistol case that would have came with it. Similar to the Caltech, it does have 2 holes to be locked as well.
Okay, and I'm gonna open that. All right, and where was this found, if you know?
This was found on the on top of the bed in the Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley's bed.
Was there anything in it?
At the time, no, it looked like this.
Okay, was there anything underneath the phone?
I learned later that there was, yes.
Okay, do you wanna tell the jury what that was?
Yes. So there is a receipt for the SP 2022 from the gun store in Oxford, as well as the ATF Youth Handgun Safety Act notice pamphlet that was previously discussed.
Okay, and is that something they have to provide?
Yes.
All right, Special Agent Brandon, what was your reaction to finding that? When did you find that the pamphlet was in here? Do you know?
For this pamphlet, I found that this was in the case during preparation for the trial of Mr. Crumbley's wife.
And did you know where it was up until that point?
Your Honor, I would object to relevance on this line of questioning.
About where it was? I guess I didn't really understand the question, where that box was?
So I
During
don't
the
want to
search
put
warrant?
words in his mouth, but as an offer of proof, it was not clear to Special Agent Brandon, based on the crime scene and the search of the home, where the ATF pamphlet was that he knew must have had to have been sold with this gun. And he picked up the phone and saw it sometime after, is what he said.
Okay.
So not the case itself, Your Honor, but the pamphlet that was within the case along with the receipt. I'm objecting to the relevance of questions about that, not the case itself.
Okay, well, I think the pamphlet being sold with the gun is relevant, and its location in the home is relevant, so I'm gonna overrule the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I'm gonna ask him about the pamphlet and ask to read excerpts of the pamphlet, and I know that opposing counsel actually asked Ed Woodgrowski to do that, so I'm hoping there's not an objection, but I can lay a proper foundation if there is.
Okay, now I don't know if he answered the question about where he found the
He did.
pamphlet.
Thank you, Your
Okay,
Honor.
right.
What was your reaction to that?
To finding the pamphlet?
Yes.
So when I lifted up the phone and saw the pamphlet in there, I was shocked.
Okay, why?
You know, as the pamphlet says on the front, it says Youth Handgun Safety Act notice. Means they were on notice. They had to pick this up and move it to the back of that gun case and basically discard it underneath the phone.
Okay, and can you tell the jury what's the purpose of the law requiring that pamphlet to be given to someone purchasing a gun?
The purpose of it, do you want me to read from it?
First, I want you to tell me the purpose, and then I want you to read.
So the purpose of the pamphlet is to inform the buyer of the firearm that juvenile gun violence is a major problem and that safely securing your firearm will prevent that from happening.
Okay, and if you open it up, where does it refer to that?
So on the first page, it says Youth Handgun Safety Act notice, and there's 4 bullet points. The first says the misuse of handguns is a leading contributor to juvenile violence and fatalities. And the second one says safely storing and securing firearms away from children will help prevent the unlawful possession of handguns by juveniles, stop accidents, and save lives.
I can take that.
Yep.
Thank you. Your Honor, we've marked the pamphlet as, we're gonna mark it as 168. I don't know if it was admitted previously. We did discuss it in through other witnesses.
Hold on a second. Okay, we're moving for the admission, 168. Any objection?
No.
168 submitted.
All right. I want to go back to make sure, like the Caltech box, there is these two like little plastic loops. What are those?
So those are designed by the manufacturer so that the case is capable of being locked, so you could actually lock your pistol inside that case.
Okay. When this was found, do you know if there was any locking mechanism in it at all?
There were not.
Okay. Were the 3 guns purchased by James Crumbley, including the SIG for his son, did they have to be registered?
So it's my understanding, based on prior investigation as part of the task force and as part of this case, that the handguns were required to be registered within the state of Michigan, yes.
And what's the timing on that?
So if you receive a pistol sales record from a federal firearms licensee in the state of Michigan, you have 10 business days to drop it off, or 10 days to drop it off at like a local county sheriff's office, your local police department. In this case, obviously the murder weapon was purchased 4 days before, so there was still some time left to drop that off. Obviously, that never occurred.
Okay. Were any of those handguns registered?
No.
All right. I want to go back to November 30th for a moment, and you said you connected with Lieutenant Marsban, and what was the purpose of doing that?
So the purpose of connecting with him at the time was to help in any way I could. He had started working on a search warrant from the Crumbley family residence, and as a part of that, I offered my assistance with whatever was necessary.
Okay. Did you have to watch the surveillance video, or did you watch the surveillance video?
Yes.
Okay. Was there anything notable about it?
Yes, there were 3 things that, and watching the surveillance video from the shooting, that I found relevant.
And what were they?
So the first was the stance that the shooter took for the shot that killed Tate. I noticed that he had some type of firearm training. It appeared to me that he did. I remember remarking to the people in the room at the time that that's what I thought. He had taken what we refer to as a shooter stance. His shoulders were rolled forward, his feet were spread. So that was the first thing that I noticed.
And what did that tell you?
I thought he had some level of proficiency with firearms, whether he had been to a gun range, whether he had training, or just been at least introduced to firearms in the past.
Okay, and then the second thing?
So the second thing was what's called a tactical magazine exchange, or what some other departments call a combat reload. So after the shooter moved through the school, and after reloading his first magazine, his firearm was completely empty, so he loaded a fully loaded magazine into the firearm and continued to shoot. After that, after firing several rounds, he ejected that magazine, placed it in his pocket, and then inserted a full magazine into the firearm so that he was fully loaded in the firearm.
And what's the purpose of that? Why is that significant?
So the way we're trained, at least for law enforcement shootings, is that if you're involved in an incident, you always want to have as much ammunition as possible. So if you have a brief moment where the gunfire is low on the gunfire, if you're in a gunfight, would be to eject your partially loaded magazine, insert a full one, but not to throw it on the ground, to keep it for later in case you need it.
Okay. What's the third thing?
So the third thing was when the shooter came out of the bathroom and surrendered to law enforcement. Prior to them coming down the hallway, he took the magazine out of the firearm and forgot to didn't rack a round out of the chamber, so there was still a round in the chamber, I believe. But he took the magazine out and placed it on top of the trash bin, which I found unique. Not something that someone would do if they had just committed a mass shooting.
After viewing that, what did you do next as a result of noting those three things?
So my responsibility at the time was to help Lieutenant Marsman create a timeline for the affidavit. After noting those things, the following day, the day after the shooting, I began to start an investigation, thinking that the shooter had been to a gun range, contacted a gun range in the area, and confirmed he had in fact been to the range.
How did you know how did you pick that gun range?
It's probably the most popular gun range in the area and for driving distance from the Crumbley residence.
All right, and as a result of your investigation leading to looking at gun range visits, what was uncovered?
So at the gun range, we were able to, it was a gun range in Clarkston, able to locate surveillance video for 2 instances, as well as receipts for visits. I believe there was numerous visits. I believe it was around 8 total visits.
And were there any other tools in the investigation you used to determine visits to gun range and who was there and at what time?
Yes, so in addition to the actual records and surveillance video, forensic review of the extractions of the Mr. Crumbley's cell phone, as well as his son's and Mrs. Crumbley's, put together more visits to the ranges as well as videos of those instances.
All right. I'm going to show, just one moment, Your Honor. Let's start with June 15th of 2021. Do you know why that date's significant?
Yes, that was the date Mr. Crumbley initiated the purchase for the Derringer.
Okay, and the slides, let me show you this. In People's 169, what are we looking at?
This is a Facebook conversation between James and Jennifer Crumbley on the 15th of June, 2021.
Okay, now time, it says UTC -4, 11:34 a.m. Is that the actual time?
Yes.
Okay, and can you read the text in blue? What does blue indicate? Which person?
Blue is Jennifer Crumbley, green is going to be James Crumbley.
Okay, and can you read those texts?
Yes, so
Facebook messages.
Jennifer Crumbley asks, talk at 12, and then Mr. Crumbley responds, taking Ethan to store at 12, and then Mrs. Crumbley asks if you get gun.
Okay, and then the next? He's answering her?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Crumbley responds, yes, and Mo, I believe that's supposed to be no. Jennifer responds, huh? And then James says, we paid for the gun and bought it, but can't pick it up till everything clears Washington, in parentheses, FBI. Could be today, tomorrow, or next day, they don't know. And then Mrs. Crumbley responds, gotcha, bring me those fruit punch things when you come to bring hay.
All right, the message about he had to wait, did you, through your investigation, did it reveal that that's consistent with what happened?
Yes.
Okay, and remind the jury why.
So sometimes when you purchase a firearm, the background may take a little bit of time, depending on a lot of different factors. And in this case, it took enough time to where Mr. Crumbley had to come back the next day to pick up the firearm.
Okay, and then the next exhibit, People's 170, do you know what that is?
Yes, this again is Facebook messages between James and Jennifer Crumbley. Blue is Jennifer, and she says, "How much is your gun?" And Mr. Crumbley replies, $300.
All right. I'm going to show you what's been marked as and admitted as People's 29. This is a receipt for, what is it for? Do you know?
This is the receipt for the Cobra, for the Derringer. This is dated 6/15. It says 6/16 at the top, which is the date the actual sale went through, and it's for $180.15.
So this is not $300. Was there a gun he purchased that was $300 that day?
Approximately, yes.
And what gun was that?
That would have been the Kel-Tec P17 22 caliber pistol.
Okay, so the Derringer, the small one, was $169, and this is the receipt for the Kel-Tec. What else is on that receipt?
It's 2 boxes of ammunition at $14.95.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to draw your attention to June 26th, which is about 10 days later. Do you know if James Crumbley went to the gun range on that date?
Yes.
What? Oh, sorry, one moment. I'm sorry, I skipped a page. Sorry about that. June 20th.
Yes, that's correct.
And the People's 171 is on the screen. Can you tell the jury what that was? What that is?
Yes, this is again Facebook messages between James and Jennifer Crumbley. In blue, Jennifer asks, "Can you guys answer your phone?" And then James Crumbley responds, "No, at gun range, loud."
All right. And People's did you find any videos through your investigation of the range on that day?
Yes.
And where'd you find it?
On James Crumbley's cell phone.
All right, and you're looking at 172 and 173. We're gonna play those for the jury, but before we do, can you tell them what they're gonna see?
Yes, so the first video is at 12:58 p.m. on June 20th, and it's a video of the shooter's son shooting the Kel-Tec pistol at the gun range. And then the following video is a video of the defendant's son shooting the Derringer at an outdoor gun range a couple minutes later.
Okay.
Same range, both?
Yes.
Go ahead.
All right. What, if anything, do you see or notice in that video?
In the second one,
Yes.
it appeared he almost shot his hand on the during the video.
And why is that?
He had his hand in front of the muzzle of the firearm.
Okay, when you say he, who do you?
I'm sorry, the defendant, Mr. Crumbley's son.
Okay, the shooter.
Yes.
All right. Did you know? Did James send those videos to anybody that day?
I don't recall if he sent them that day or the next day, but he did send them to Mrs. Crumbley at some point.
All right, and how do you know that?
I reviewed her cell phone as well.
Okay, and Exhibit 174, can you tell the jury what that is?
Yes, so that is one of the videos being sent on June 21st, 2021.
All right, and this is 2 slides, it's 2 slides. Can you do this one? Okay. And then, is this the second video?
Yep, this is in the reverse order. So they're both videos were sent from James Crumbley to Jennifer Crumbley on June 21st, 2021.
Okay, so these exhibits are him sending her the videos?
Yes.
All right, did you learn what she did with the videos, if anything?
Yes, she took one of the videos and uploaded it, I believe as an Instagram story.
Okay, and that's exhibit 175. Can you read what the post says in addition to the video?
Sure. It says Ethan, and it tags, I believe that's Mr. Crumbley's Instagram account. Both got handguns this week, testing them out at the range.
All right, and then now we're to drawing your attention to June 26th. Did they go to the gun range that day?
Yes.
Do you know where it was?
It was at so for the rest of these, I believe it's the indoor gun range in Clarkston, Michigan.
Okay, and exhibit 176, can you tell the jury what that is?
This is a receipt in the name of James Robert Crumbley on June 26, 2021 for one range, handgun range fee of $20 and then one small silhouette target at 75 cents.
Do you know if videos were taken on that day?
Yes.
Do you know if they were sent to anyone?
I do.
And who were they sent to?
Jennifer Crumbley.
Okay, drawing your attention to exhibit 177. What is that, if you know?
This is a video sent from James Crumbley to Jennifer Crumbley of the shooter at the firearms range in Clarkston on June 26th.
Okay. And is 178, which is admitted, I believe, is this the video that was taken and sent to Jennifer?
Yes, this is actually, I believe, is the Instagram story that was created from that video and uploaded to Instagram by Jennifer Crumbley.
Can you tell from the video which firearm he's using?
Yes, that's the Kel-Tec P17 .22 caliber pistol.
Okay. Drawing your attention to July 2nd, did you uncover any evidence that James and his mother-in-law, Jennifer's mother, went to the range with the shooter?
Yes.
And how did you discover that?
So there were messages between James Crumbley and his mother-in-law on Facebook discussing a range visit. I think it's a conversation occurs on July 2nd, 2021, but it's actually for a range visit occurring on, I believe, July 3rd, 2021.
Okay, can you read that to the jury?
Sure. So in blue is going to be James Crumbley's mother-in-law. She says, still planning on taking the shooter to the gun range tomorrow morning, then lunch. Is he still available, and do we need to make reservations? Mr. Crumbley responds, he is good, no reservations needed. I'll go with you guys. His mother-in-law replies, awesome, glad you can join us. We don't know what we are doing, LOL.
For the record, this is 377.
377. And then the next response from James?
Just take Maybe Road up to Dixie, turn left, and it will be on the right-hand side. The shooter will be excited. We will rent a few different guns. They have a special for 9mm on 25 for a box of 50. His mother-in-law replies, sounds great. Mr. Crumbley says, make it closer to 1045.
All right, and do we have any video from that day?
We do not.
Do we know who was there? Well, first, it's 179 and 180. What are those?
Those are receipts from July 25th. Those are not from that visit.
Okay, so now we're to July 25th.
Yes.
And what do those receipts show?
So on the left-hand side of the screen is looks like a purchase of ammunition for 6 boxes of .22 caliber ammunition for a total of 4790 or 5082 at the bottom. And then on the right, it's a range visit by Mr. Crumbley. It's a handgun range fee of $20, a small silhouette. I should mention that the receipt on the left also is in the name James Crumbley.
What's a silhouette mean?
It's a silhouette of a person that's used at a gun range.
Okay, and Exhibit 181, can you tell the jury what that is?
Yes, so this is geolocation information for the Gmail account for James Crumbley. And for, I believe he is in green on this. And then the purple dots would be Jennifer Crumbley meeting on July 25th, 2021. Both Jennifer and James Crumbley were at the firearms range in Clarkston, Michigan.
Okay, I'm drawing your attention to August 15th. Exhibit 183, this is a receipt, what is it for?
This is dated August 15th, 2021. The receipt has a range fee of $20 again. I believe that's so it'd be 200 rounds of 22 caliber ammunition and one small silhouette, again, a silhouette of a person target.
And 184, what is this?
This is James Crumbley's Gmail geolocation information showing he was at the Clarkston gun range at that time.
Okay, and you were here for Ed Wogrowski's testimony, correct?
Yes.
All right, did you see the video that the shooter sent to his friend in August of 2021?
I did.
All right, I'm going to put 70 and 71 up on the screen. That's one slide. First, what are we looking at?
So this is the first video filmed by the defendant's son on August 19th around 9:30 p.m. that was sent to his friend.
All right, and what time was it?
It was 9:31 p.m.
Okay, and can you see that video? Can you stop right here? Okay, I'm stopping. Mr. Keese is stopping it. What are we looking at?
So this is the defendant's son holding the Kel-Tec P17 pistol. It doesn't appear to have a magazine inserted. Didn't appear to have a round in the chamber. The safety was, again, red means dead. The safety was not engaged.
Okay, and then can you continue? All right. Can you tell, based on, I should probably lay a better foundation. Were you ever inside the Crumbley home?
Yes.
When were you there?
On the night of November 30th, 2021, the night of the shooting, we executed the search warrant there.
Okay, so you were there during the search?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recognize anything in that video that signifies where the shooter was?
I do, but not from being in the residence. It was from other cell phone extractions from, I believe, Mrs. Crumbley and Mr. Crumbley's phones. I believe they changed couches in that living room at some point. It was a black leather couch that I recognized being in the living room.
Okay. All right. Exhibit 72 and 73. They've both been previously admitted. Can you tell the jury what this is?
This is the video that I believe Detective Wogrowski had testified to previously. It was sent to the defendant's son's friend by the defendant's son on August 20th at 12:30 in the morning.
All right, and was there a text that accompanied this right after or before the video was sent?
Yes, it was around the time that the video was sent. I believe it said, my dad left it out, so I thought, why not, LOL. I'm paraphrasing, I don't know if that's the exact text, but that's the general idea.
Do we have the text? The next slide. Next slide. Is that the text?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. And we're going to play the video, which has been previously admitted. And before we do, can you tell the jury what they're about to see?
Sure. So the defendant's son has the Kel-Tec P17 pistol in his hand. Again, the safety's not engaged. He slams the firearm down on top of the magazine, loads the magazine, and then sends the slide forward, chambering around into the firearm, meaning that if he pulled the trigger at that moment, it would go off.
Okay. All right. What do you see in that picture besides the Kel-Tec?
Appears to be a cat.
And based on your investigation, do you know about that cat?
I believe that's the shooter's cat, Dexter.
All right, and what surface is that? Can you tell?
Yes, so after being in the home for the search warrant, I'm aware that that is their kitchen really didn't have a kitchen area. It was more their living room or dining room table, so to speak. It was a higher kind of four-top table. That is the same wood grain that's on the table in their dining room.
All right, and we know this was taken at 12:30 a.m. Is that what you said?
I believe it was sent at 12:30, but I think it was taken relatively close to that time.
Okay. Do you hear anything else in the background?
All I heard was crickets and then the sound of the magazine and then the slide going forward.
Okay, and we previously introduced the GPS data that shows whether or not James Crumbley was in the home during this time. Was he?
He was.
Okay. Okay, can you finish the thing? All right, I just want to talk to me about this video, Special Agent Brandon, and what your view is on whether or not what was happening in that video was safe.
So I would say that regardless if Mr. Crumbley was standing over his shoulder or not, that would not be safe. The firearm is on top of a dining room table. It's loaded, the safety's off, and it's pointed in a direction that if you're inside their home, you can't tell from the video whether he's facing the front of the home or the side of the home. But regardless, the firearm's pointed at a direction that would be almost chest level if a person was beyond the walls of the house or if a person was standing nearby. Not to mention almost, pointing the firearm at the cat.
All right. That's the magazine. Can you tell if it's loaded or not?
Yes, that magazine there, you can see the rounds of ammunition in the firearm.
All right, and you said, could you see whether there was a round in the chamber?
I don't believe there was until he loaded the magazine and then sent the slide forward, or else it would have malfunctioned.
Okay, where is he loading? That's loading the magazine. Is that that's the safety?
Yep, so the safety's not engaged and the round is, the top of the magazine is visible there. And if once he sends that slide forward, that's what takes that round and puts it into the chamber.
Okay. What if that was being supervised by somebody like James? Would it change your opinion of the safety of that action?
No, so based on what we spoke about before being the 4 rules of firearm safety, so obviously that firearm's loaded, so treat every firearm like it's loaded, point it in a safe direction, so there's really no safe direction for that firearm to be if it's chest level on a table. The only safe position would be whether it was outside or pointed at the floor. Obviously if you're loading a firearm to carry on your person, if you point it at the floor where it's away from people so it can't hurt anyone if it discharged.
Okay. I want to draw your attention to September 1st. Did the defendant, did James take his son to the shooting range on that day?
Your Honor, I'm just gonna ask for clarification, September 1st of what year?
2021, the weapons weren't purchased until June 2021 and November 2021.
Yes, I believe that's correct, yes.
All right, and Exhibit 185, what is that?
It says, it's a Facebook message from James Crumbley to Jennifer Crumbley, and it says, the shooter and I are headed to the gun range.
And Exhibit 186 and 187.
Those are receipts from the gun range in Clarkston, both in James Crumbley's name. The one on the left is for range time. It's like 200 rounds of .22 caliber ammunition, 2 silhouette targets, and then a rental of a .22 caliber revolver. And then on the right-hand side is 1 50-round box of .22 caliber ammunition.
Did James take a video of his son that day?
Yes.
And how do you know?
I located on James Crumbley's phone.
And that's Exhibit 188?
Yes.
All right, we're gonna play that.
Department, Brett Holmgren, Director of National Security Agency, General Timothy Hawk, and Defense Intelligence Agency